Like it just really is expensive. And if you're making $10 million a year, it's not expensive. It's no big deal. But if you're like the average person and you have more than one or two kids involved in the game, it's very, very expensive.
So
I like this conversation.
it is. It's
Yeah.
a fun conversation
Yeah.
too, because I think it kind of it blends a lot of different topics. Like one is obviously just the differences, but then it kind of gets into like why some levels struggle more than others, or like different areas why things are stronger versus other areas. I think we're going to kind of touch on all that stuff, so it should be kind of interesting. So the first thing, just in general, like I said before, we don't work with those super young kids, but would you agree in general that there's a big gap between the, let's say, AAA versus AAA level? So that would be like the first question in general. And then the second part, kind of to make it more clear, is when do you think that gap starts to be an issue, or when is it apparent, or when do you think it starts to actually affect the development of the kids? So like at what point, first of all, do you agree that there's a big gap? Then at what point is there a big gap?
Yeah. Okay. So the first question, let's just start with that. So do you think there's a big level in gap in levels?
Yeah. So this is specific AAA to AAA.
Yeah. Okay. So I said this in a podcast months ago, I believe, that there was a time, and it was the year, I believe, when it was when I remember Zach Cassian and Danny Maggio and Ryan Wilson, all those types of guys were playing AAA, and I was more involved in the youth hockey. And there was I guess there was, maybe it was just there was more hockey players playing that could afford to play. I don't know, but it seemed to me that the interchangeability, if that is an actual word, between the bottom half, or let's say at least the third line, first 2D, from a AAA level and going down to a lot of the AA teams in this area at least, was not that big of a gap. Like the interchangeable guys.
Yes.
So let's say bottom three,
And I would agree.
bottom three,
Yeah.
bottom two defensemen.
Sorry to interrupt. Don't want to make you lose your train of thought.
But you won't.
But when I played, so I would have been a few years after those guys, because Zach would be I think 3 or 4 years older than me. So my age, it was exactly that. I've talked about this before, where as we got a little bit older, then those top AA kids came up and played on our AAA team. So it was very interchangeable for my age too. So that would have been even several years after that. It was still true from what I remember in our area, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it was like all of a sudden there was it would be hard to find a player or two to go to either of the AAA teams that would make, like, it would be like same guy, or no, there's a little bit of a gap. So at one point, so I would say, let's say 10, 15 years ago, I found that maybe there was more travel hockey, maybe, you know what I mean? More travel hockey, more centers that you can play. Maybe there's more kids, and then the bottom half were interchangeable, and there was a little bit more competition for those spots for sure. And then it dropped off, obviously, because that's just life. And then I found like 10, 15 years ago, let's say probably in the last 10, 15 years, that is now I find it's a big gap. That it's very hard to find guys that can interchange just from a skill perspective. That doesn't, now saying that doesn't mean that these kids can't develop. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, in general, the gap of finding, if you needed to replace two guys to make a better team, like, you're hard pressed to do it in this area.
Right. So just to, again, to be clear, because I want to try to make this as clear as possible, we've said in the past that, in your opinion, and I kind of agreed with the opinion, we kind of, as a general rule of thumb, we've talked about when to make that jump from AA to AAA as being around that 13-year-old kind of age.
Yeah, I would always say that.
In general. So
I would always say that.
I'm going to get back to that question after, but do you think that, is that kind of still the line for you where you think that the gap is most apparent? Again, we would be specifically talking about in our area, because I know, like, for example, out west, like AA is the highest level until they're like 15 or 16 or something, right? So this wouldn't apply to those people. Or if you're in the States, things are different. So we're just talking about in Ontario. Would you still say that gap would be by that 13-year-old-ish age? That would be kind of where you find the gap to be now. Now you could fall behind I guess.
Yeah, you can, but you can also not.
Right.
You know, like you can never discount a player's commitment and development and puberty and all the things that can make a kid better.
Yep.
See it,
See, dude.
Nico? So you can never discount that. Like, and that's the part I want to be clear about. Is it doesn't mean that because you haven't played AAA hockey until you're 14 that you could never play. It's just that's not what it means. It just means like what I find is that so if someone might argue that that's why you need to go early, but I would say that it comes down to commitment. And I'm not talking about mom and dad taking them to 6:30 in the morning practices, like skill sessions and stuff and getting all the ice you can. I'm talking about the kid's personal commitment to wanting to be a hockey player. So you are who you hang out with a lot of the times. So if you're hanging around with kids that want to be on the ice and want to shoot pucks and want to watch hockey and they're like-minded about hockey, there is a better chance that you or whatever your child will be in the same boat. They'll be into hockey. Whereas if you hang out with someone that likes to play but doesn't love to play, then in their spare time, if you're on your team, it's like, well, maybe instead of watching a hockey game, we do something else, which is fine. But I think it's just the like-mindedness is one of the big things that is a big difference.
So one thing that pops to mind, you kind of said that like all of a sudden there was a change where now there's a gap that you noticed where it wasn't as interchangeable, which I also remember, and I can't really put a pin on exactly when it happened, but what do you think in our area at least, like why do you think that happened? Now the first thing that pops to my head would it be do you think that it is the like excessive investment in extra stuff that people started to do? Because all of this like extra like that was never a thing really when I was a kid. Like some people did, but now it's like most people feel like they have to do all of this extra stuff. So do you think like that maybe created an even bigger gap in the earlier stages where it's like these kids are just getting so many more reps from that like excessive investment early on that the gap shows earlier? Maybe
Yeah,
like I'm just kind of playing with that
yeah.
idea. I don't
Well,
really know.
I'll go back to that because that's something I was for sure going to talk about with this. But I would say like just the gap in general, not talking about the skill level. I'm talking about if we just say take an A off the AAA, and as you move down, I think in this area, I can only speak for this area, but I would say it's probably true. Is how do I say it? I feel like the population in general for hockey players is it's really expensive. Like it just really is expensive. And if you're making $10 million a year, it's not expensive. It's no big deal. But if you're like the average person and you have more than one or two kids involved in the game, it's very, very expensive. So and then quite honestly, we have a lot of people that come from other countries that are not hockey people. So they might be soccer, they might
There's
be
other
playing other
interests,
sports. So
yeah.
now let's say you have 1 million kids in an area, or $500,000 or dollars. I'm talking money all the time. If you have a $200,000 or 200,000 population, and it's a lot of new Canadians or new Americans in that area, and they don't even get the game, then you're automatically taking some kids
Yeah.
that aren't playing. And
That's
then
a good
and then,
point.
no, it's
I didn't really
huge.
think about that.
No,
Yeah.
it's huge. So if you look at like our area here, Windsor itself, okay, Windsor's population is about 250,000 people, right? And in that 250,000 people, most of the people that are newer to the area, the population, like the demographics, would be like a lot of immigrants, right? So that 250 as far as a hockey demographic, it's changed the demographics. So I'm not trying to be anything but honest, right? So if you're pulling from a population, which I think like the Windsor AAA situation is, they're pulling more from the newer Canadians, not all, but like, right? So that population of hockey players that would just naturally, like, my uncle played, my other uncle played, my grandfather played a little bit. I played.
There's like
My son
less
plays.
per capita now.
Whereas now you
Yeah.
get someone in that doesn't understand the game at all. And it's like, well, let's just play soccer. It costs us $10. What $1,000 for skates? Like, I can't afford that, right? So like, how can they play? So I think that has part of it. I think part of it moving to different, like the outskirts of the towns changes the demographics for the AA centers, or it makes one really powerful and one less. So that's one. So that's where I would say that changes a lot. And then the just being able to afford hockey. I mean, like honestly, there's people that for the adults that listen, like I don't have to tell you this. It's like it's expensive. So if you want to do extra stuff, it's like that's even more expensive. So that could be a deterrent. And honestly, if I had 3 kids playing at the same time, I don't know if I could do it. So I'm talking about playing at the AAA level, right? So sometimes you're fortunate to be able to play in a situation like the stars line up, or you think your kid is good and you put them, you mortgage your house. I've seen that people put a second mortgage on their house to play hockey. So anyways, the demographics I think play a big part in the gap. I think that kids, the next part I would say is I think kids in general, as we talked about last podcast, I think kids in general, like we talked about the communication, how they have phones now. I mean, am I a rocket scientist for saying that? No. But kids have so many other things to take up their time. When I played hockey, when I was a kid, we, it was like eat, go outside, play. And we always, you have to pull us off the street to play street hockey, or to pull us off to not play anymore. It's time to eat. Mom begging you to come in to eat. Like, we have to eat, man. So like the kids would go in and we be right back out. We played sports. We played it all the time. So I think in general, the athletes, we weren't playing road hockey and the games to be pros and development. We played because we loved the game. And then we had in Sudbury up north, we had outdoor rinks all over the place. So we'd be all over the place. We could catch ice all the time. And it was never about development. It was about, we love to play hockey. So I think that's my next point in the development I think is missing in a big way.
That's the other thing. That's a good point too, because it's like even if you didn't love playing hockey, you would go play hockey just in your spare time because that's what there was to do. Like, dude, that was the activity.
There's guys that in our neighborhood that were better ball hockey players than me, because they had rubber boots and a hockey stick and they were tough as nails. And they needed something to do, but they couldn't afford to play hockey. Maybe they would have been great hockey players. So if you trickle that down 30 years, 40 years, right?
So okay, so now that's great. Those are 2 really good points. Those are things I didn't really think of. So good add.